Sorry, just to say we have another Zoom at 7 o'clock, so we'll have to go then, but
All right.
we're here for half an hour.
We're going to try to finish by 7:30 because some others have got to leave at 7:30. Tom's got to leave at 7:30. Fenny Smith, who's not here yet, has got to leave at 7:30.
I'd quite like to leave at 7:30 if possible,
Yes, fine.
for the same reason as Fenny.
Oh, choir practice. No.
I practice
Yes.
on Zoom.
Yes, of course. Yeah, you're right. Another day of Underwood, I guess.
Yeah, sorry. Just walking around the house getting some water.
Well done.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Welcome. Well,
Thank
let's
you.
get underway then. A very warm welcome to, let me go back to screen one, to Tony Best, who lives somewhere, I think, in South Wales. Is that right, Tony?
That's right, in Pontypool.
In Pontypool. I met Tony virtually at a Make Votes Matter meeting at the beginning of, well, just 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But we've been in correspondence since earlier in the year. I'm the chair, slap my wrist, chair of Herefordshire for Europe since the end of last year. And we've had a series, we've been meeting sort of fortnightly on Zoom since the summer. And this is the 4th of our series of information webinars. Earlier were on agriculture, on EU settled status, on European Green Deal. This one is sort of stepping slightly away from mainstream European movement stuff. The European movement doesn't itself have a policy on proportional representation, but it does recognize a need for electoral reform. And indeed, quite a lot of members of different groups and branches of the European movement recognize that same need too. Several of us in Herefordshire for Europe, like Tom Misselbrook, are very keen to support proportional representation. And when Make Votes Matter had its National Day of Action in August, 4 or 5 of us got together at the in Hereford Hightown at the Herefordshire Bull there, and Nat Waring, with whom I'd already been in touch earlier this year, who is group leader, or whatever her title is, for the Herefordshire MVM lot, she joined us too. So Tony's going to kick off speaking a bit about Make Votes Matter, and then Nat will say something about what her plans are for Herefordshire when we can be more active, and then we'll open the floor to questions. We've only got 3 rooms at the moment, so there's a chance I may see you if you put your hand up like that. But if you use the participants button, wherever that is, probably under the 3 dots at more, if you click on participants, you'll find that you can put a hand up there. And that allows me to see a blue hand there, and I'll keep an eye on that as well as on the chat column. If you have questions while we're going on, while Tony and Nat are speaking and don't want to put them down, put them in the chat column and we'll come to them afterwards. We are still expecting a few more people from the West Midlands because George, who was kindly inviting other people, told me that there would be 1 person from EU in Brum, 6 from Malvern, 1 from Shropshire, 2 from Solihull, 3 from Staffordshire, 4 from Stratford and 4 from Walsall. Well, a lot of them aren't here yet, but I hope they catch us up when they come in. So we don't have a specific agenda this evening, except that I hope we would, in the course of the evening, cover things like the rationale of why we need proportional representation in this country, information on what different forms of proportional representation there are and their merits or demerits. And I always like to focus on action too. What are we going to do? And how do we get people engaged with this? I've also recently joined the Electoral Reform Society, which has its annual conference open to everybody and AGM, which is open to members only, on Saturday the 5th of December. I had an email from them today about a petition they're circulating to press for local councils in England to be given a chance to use proportional representation. The Senate, the Welsh Senate, just a week ago, made that an option for local councils in Wales to move from first past the post to proportional representation. So the trend's in the right way. England's the only country in the Union left which does not have proportional representation for local elections. So I think there's a big drive here that we need to support, because in the end, if we want a parliament that's more representative of national opinion, which we're going to want if we're going to be one day seeking to rejoin the European Union, then we need a more balanced voice at Westminster. I won't say any more there because I'm taking up Tony's time. Over to you, Tony.
Right, I've got my stopwatch here to keep myself down to 15 minutes. Otherwise, I just ramble on forever. So
All right.
I promise I will keep myself to 15. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invite. As you know, I'm Tony Best. I'm a retired teacher and exams officer, and I live in South Wales. And since I've retired, I've had a bit of time to do things, and one of those was join Make Votes Matter. I've also joined the Electoral Reform Society, and the difference between them is that the Electoral Reform Society is a bit like Winston Churchill fighting the whole war, and Make Votes Matter is a bit like Field Marshal Montgomery just fighting one battle. And we're a single issue pressure group which wants our present voting system replaced by a system of proportional representation. We don't particularly favour any particular one. We would want that to be left to the decision for each country, for the country, by the people in power at the time. So we don't particularly promote one system, although I suspect that each one of us has our own preference, because there is quite a big difference between the various systems of proportional representation. And what is proportional representation? It's any system in which the seats match the votes and all votes are counted equally. And that just doesn't happen in this country at the moment. And most people, I feel, go along to the polling station and put their X against the candidate of their choice, and don't actually consider whether the voting system is fair or not. In fact, the voting system is incredibly unfair, incredibly unfair. To use an analogy, if Boris comes up on the television tomorrow and says, that's it, we've cured it, we've got all these vaccines, everyone's been injected, everyone's going to be fine, the whole thing's finished, you know, go down the pub and say what a great chap I am tonight with your mates. And so if I went down to the pub with 4 of my mates, and of course the pub would be crowded with all these people celebrating how well Boris has done, and we said, well, let's have a kitty and go up to the pub, go up to the bar whenever you take some money out of the kitty and go up to the bar. If I put £20 in a kitty and all of us put £20 in the kitty, we'd more or less expect to get about 20 quid's worth of drinks back by the end of the evening. But if I went up and bought my first pint and drunk it down, paid £3 for it, and then, you know, half hour, 3/4 an hour later, I went up for my second pint, put my hand in the hat where the kitty is, and it's all gone because the chap next to me has decided to have a bottle of champagne and the one on the other side has decided to have a bottle of whiskey, then I'm going to come out being pretty miffed. Now, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going down the pub, then I should have the same, I should feel the same about going down to the voting station, the polling station, that if my vote should be the same as for anyone else. And in fact, with our system, it is totally skew. It took 866,000 votes in the last election to get 1 Green MP. 866,000 votes. On the other hand, if you were in Scotland and you supported the Scottish nationalists, you only had to have 26,000 votes to get a Scots nationalist MP. So votes are just not equal. And in various different parts of the country, the votes favour certain parties. In Hereford, for instance, they're very much in favour of the Conservatives. You know, I looked at your recent results in the general election, and in both of them, the Conservatives got 61% or 63% of the votes in the two Hereford constituencies. And obviously, they got the MPs because of that. And you would say, well, that's right. I mean, most people voted for them. They got over half the votes. Well, that is true. But when you think about it, and you look at the Herefordshire results overall, that although that many people voted for the Conservatives, that still leaves about 37 to 39% in those two constituencies who've actually voted for someone else, and they didn't get anyone elected. And I know a few years ago, Hereford and Worcester were one authority, and if you joined with the seats in Hereford and Worcester, you've got 8 seats altogether between Hereford and in Worcestershire, and all 8 are held by the Conservatives. Yet, under PR, you'd have a system where perhaps 5 would be held by the Conservatives, 2 by Labour, 1 by Liberal. Or possibly it might go 3 Labour, 1 Liberal, but no Liberals. But there is a more chance of there being a division between the parties. And that would more fairly reflect the way that the votes were cast in the elections. In Herefordshire County Council, quite interestingly, although in the general election, looking at it, 21.6% of the people voted Labour in Herefordshire South, 13.3% in Herefordshire North. In actual Herefordshire County Council, there isn't a single Labour MP, Labour councillor. Now, interestingly, of course, you have 18 independents in Herefordshire County Council. Now, I don't know whether they are Conservatives with a different name, or whether they're communists or Brexiteers or whatever. But there is a much more variety in the county council than there is in the voting in Herefordshire itself. If you come to my area, then you'll find that it's the other way round. I mean, I don't think since the war, there certainly hasn't been anyone who isn't a Labour MP in Torvine, which is my constituency. So that doesn't mean to say there aren't Conservative supporters there. In fact, if my MP decided, he's in his constituency office and decides to wander down to Greg's to get a sandwich at lunchtime, and he walks down the street and he passes 100 people in the street, he will only pass 25 people who voted for him. He will pass 35 who didn't vote for him, and he'll pass 40 people who didn't vote for anyone. So that is not really, it's not a way of saying with a great support of democracy in our country. And why do so many people not vote? They often don't vote because they don't think their vote counts. And under proportional representation, 9%, on average, 9% more people vote in proportional representation elections than in a first past the post system. People think that our present system is the norm, but it's not. There are only 3 countries in Europe which use a first past the post system. France uses a different method to ours, the alternative vote. And the only other country in Europe who uses our system, does anyone know that?
Yes.
Go on then, Richard.
Belarus.
Belarus, that's stalwart democracy. Yes, Belarus. And we are in danger of, democracy is a fragile flower. It's not an oak tree. It's a fragile flower, and it needs to be looked after and tended carefully. We've seen in America how very close how close did America get to actually being not a democracy anymore in the last election? I mean, Trump was acting a little bit like a dictator who refuses to accept the result of the election. You know, and that's a massive democracy. Proportional representation is popular in countries which use it. New Zealand, a recent poll and referendum showed that 86% of people were really happy with the system and didn't want to go back to the first past the post, which they ditched about 20 years ago. It's popular in countries throughout Europe. They all use different methods, and it is fair. Make Votes Matter is not worried about keeping Brexiteers out or keeping communists out or keeping Tories out because they happen to be the party in power. It's all about fairness. It doesn't, as far as Make Votes Matter is concerned, it is the fairness which counts. And seeing I've already used 10 minutes of my time without realizing it, how can you help Make Votes Matter? Well, we have an action day coming up on December the 12th. It's a day you'll probably remember because it was the day of the election last year. And on the anniversary of that election, we want people to send a Christmas card to their MP at the House of Commons and just say, Happy Christmas. And then a message like, all I want for Christmas is proportional representation. Something simple like that, whatever message you like inside, keep it pleasant, don't abuse them, and perhaps they might get the message that there is a groundswell of people. And if you could just do that, it would be really helpful. And then post your picture, take a picture of yourself posting the letter, posting the card, and put it on social media if you could. And if you could also let Make Votes Matter know, that would also be useful. But please try and do that. It's just we're limited to what we can do in these times, but if you could do that, it would be absolutely brilliant. I have already posted the links. It took me about 10 minutes to do it before the meeting started, but I've posted the link. If you want to sign up and enjoy Make Votes Matter, that would be great. Don't get put off by me, by the way. The people in charge at Make Votes Matter are young and energetic and really know their stuff. You know, they really are vibrant and enthusiastic. So it's not old retired gits like me who are involved in it. You know, if you want to join, great. There's lots of things we do. Our form of attack at the moment is three-part: a grassroots action like the one I've just mentioned. These sort of meetings to various organisations and political parties, and our other third prong of attack is the Labour Party, because we recognise we've got to get one of the two major parties to sign up to it. The Labour Party have resisted it for so long, despite the fact I don't think they realise that they don't actually, although it eventually does give them power every now and then, if you count back, they get, for every sort of year they have in power, the Conservatives have 2 years in power. So we're trying to persuade them that they need to come over to proportional representation. And people like me talking to you, there are people doing the same thing to Labour Party constituency groups, etc. And I think we've got something like 90 signed up, 90 groups in the Labour Party already pledged to are pushing the Labour Party to change. And Keir Starmer himself has said that electoral reform needs to take place. So if you could join, that would be great. If you could send that Christmas card, that would be great. Also, the other thing I think we do need to do is to educate people. Educate people about the different forms of election, because I know that people generally don't know because they're not that interested in politics. But if they were interested in things being fair, then they might get somewhere. So when COVID is finished and out of the way, I'd like us to get into schools and do some and colleges. I think actually I've rushed it through a bit, and I've probably missed a ton of things out. But
Well, thank you very much, Tony. We probably cover more stuff in questions. For
Yes.
those who can stay on for that. I'm going to invite Nat to speak in a moment, but can I just ask everyone, have they seen that Tony put the Make Votes Matter website and the sign-up sheet at the top of the chat column? It's what time? 6:31. Has everyone seen that? The website is makevotesmatter.org.uk. Makevotesmatter.org.uk.
Richard, if anybody joined late, their chat might not pick it up.
Oh, that's true. All right. So do you want me to repeat that for those?
I'll copy it, Richard, onto the chat now.
Down to the chat. Before I invite Nat, though, can I just ask one question of Tony? Because one of the regular criticisms of proportional representation is that it leads to hung parliaments. Now, is that a bad thing?
No. Well, I don't think it is a bad thing, Richard.
I'd stick with it now if you don't mind.
No.
I don't think it is a bad thing because, well, apart from anything else, we've had hung parliaments in twice in this century, and once before back in or very close to it in the late 1970s, and countries like New Zealand have managed perfectly well with a hung parliament, and so has Germany. They have managed to keep strong government even though they've worked in coalition.
Yes, and Ireland recently.
Yes.
All right, Nat, I can't see where Nat is. She must be on page 2. Yes, could you be unmuted now and say something about your plans for action in this county of Herefordshire?
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can anyway.
Great. Hi everyone. Thank you, Tony, for that. You covered all the key messages there, and I was very impressed with all the statistics and the metaphors, which I really struggle with. So thank you for illuminating us with those. And I just wanted to say just very briefly about how I became the local group leader and some of the things that we've just done over the past couple of years. I, like I said, was very impressed with Tony, but Tony is right that the leaders of Make Votes Matter, Joe and Kleiner, are incredibly vibrant and impressive, and they've really, it's like a labour of love for them. They've devoted their, the past 5 years to it, and I get the sense that they just give this everything they've got, and they've done so well with it. I organised the talks and discussions calendar at the Left Bank Village, and actually one of the first speakers that we had there, organised through the Green Party, was Kleiner and Joe from Make Votes Matter back in 2016, and at the end they just did a shout out, would anyone be prepared to be the local group leader? And I said yes. I had been a secondary school science teacher for 6 years, and I'd been part of this debating club think tank at the school, and we'd covered electoral reform, but that was all I knew about it. But I was instantly convinced by the arguments they gave about PR, which Tony shared with us this evening. So I started organising almost quarterly meetings at one point, and built up a mailing list just for the Make Votes Matter side of things, of about 50 local people. Basically what I was doing for a long time was just anytime Make Votes Matter had a national event going on, such as the launch of the Good Systems agreement in Parliament, which was really interesting, the meeting of the Alliance, which is MPs meeting with partners like Compass, Electoral Reform Society, Unlock Democracy, going along to those meetings in Parliament, the the activists workshop in Bristol and the demo on Parliament Square. So going along to things like that and just kind of saying to the mailing list, kind of come along if you can. We've also done for the past 3 years stalls at the Sixth Form College Freshers Fair. And thank you to those people that have helped me with that. It's really nice engaging with the students. You know, I think people find that particularly rewarding. And then just last year as well, the Info Fest at the Tech College as well, we added on to that. And we got a contact at the Sixth Form College, Marco Martinelli, head of politics. He's very happy for me and others to go in and give an interactive session with the students about PR and engage them. Yeah, there are these days of action that make Votes Matter does. And last year for this day of action, we organised our first stall in Hightown, which is a kind of nerve-wracking experience, kind of trying to book the stall and get all the materials and engage with the public. But the kind of, once you've done it the first time, it gets easier. So you know, really optimistic about doing that again when we get the chance. I haven't been doing so many meetings so much anymore, and mainly kind of because I'm a bit strapped for time, but also with the coronavirus, and I'm almost reluctant to start any more meetings because I'm talking to others and I'm getting the sense that people have got a lot of Zoom meetings at the moment. And also I could slot it into the calendar of the talks and discussions, but almost the thing with that is that the talks and discussions calendar is like meant to be a talk shop with lots of different voices of different opinions coming together, whereas I feel like Make Votes Matter regular meetings need to kind of be like minutes, agendas, action points, everyone on the same page, that kind of thing. And so things kind of, I'm sorry, kind of have stalled a bit locally, and I'm just kind of waiting for someone who's maybe got a bit more time than me to come along, who's got some ideas and enthusiasm, and that I could support them. And kind of that's where we got to. But Tony's absolutely right, there is a Christmas Day of Action that we can all get involved with on like an individual basis. Yeah, there's probably other things, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much indeed, Nat. We've got quite a few questions popping up in the chat column, but I'm going to ask Tom Pratt from EU in Brum to speak briefly, please, first about Unlock Democracy, because he's a council member of that.
Thank you very much. So I've been involved with Unlock Democracy for about 10 years. And I got involved initially in campaigning for AV, the referendum held in 2011. The less said, the better. Unlock Democracy was formed about in 2008 out of Charter 88. And the main focus for Unlock Democracy, as was Charter.
We just lost you, Tom. At least I have. Can others hear Tom?
No.
No, I'm afraid we lost Tom at the moment.
We'll come back to Tom as soon as we can get him, but he's just made, oh, there he is. Tom.
Yeah, I'm here.
We lost you for a moment. We lost your sound.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I'm a council member for Unlock Democracy. Its main aim is to campaign for a written constitution. And as we don't have that at the moment. Another campaign that Unlock Democracy has is to basically challenge the government's actions around, changing the constitution. So I don't know if their election manifesto, page 48, had ideas such as cracking down on judicial reviews. So if those are restricted, the public can't challenge bad government policy.
Yep.
There's also talks about closing the Electoral Commission, when, if anything, it needs to be beefed up. And they also challenge big money. So, for example, you've got a number of think tanks that are influencing trade policy and probably influencing the income of the outcome of the Brexit negotiations from this side by urging sort of a particular outcome. I mean, in a way, like the ERS, Make Votes Matter and Unlock Democracy are, they're the big three in the democracy sector. I'll put details of Unlock Democracy in the chat. We're looking very much to work with other groups. You'll probably be seeing a lot more of Unlock Democracy in the news as the new director, Tom Brake, former Lib Dem MP, was recently appointed. And it has been kind of quite a few years for Unlock Democracy, but we really want to work with other groups on issues which affect all of us, never mind Brexit.
Thank you very much, Tom. Now, you mentioned that you were involved with the AV referendum, and
Yeah.
Helen Grogan has made the point that AV was not about proper PR, proportional representation. Can either Tom or Helen say some more about that, please?
I'm happy to. So the alternative vote is still a what's called a majoritarian system, like first past the post. I think in a way, like having been involved in the democracy centre and sector and pro-European campaigning, I think that the same kind of forces that acted against AV and pro-EU campaigners existed here, because you had, I think, the Electoral Reform Society has historically worked within Westminster to try and influence politicians to change their mind on particular issues. And I think, and then you've got other grassroots groups which have popped up, like Unlock Democracy, and out of those, Make Votes Matter. I think both the Remain campaign and the Yes to Fairer Votes campaign, the campaign which supported AV, their message was not good enough, really. Neither of their messages were not good enough. The Labour Party were, as Helen's pointing out, hopelessly split on the issue. I remember a certain Gisela Stewart saying she would vote no and promoting no on the grounds that she wanted PR. And of course, she went and joined the Vote Leave campaign. The No to AV claimed that if we were going to have AV, we need to invest £250 million on electoral machines, which was complete rubbish. And well, their point was we could spend this money better, like on the NHS. Does this sound familiar to you? I think the problem we have is that with the AV referendum, because it was so decisive, I think it was something like 68-32 overall, 68% against AV and 32%, for it. I think it was quite decisive. The Conservatives sort of have used it to claim electoral reforms being kicked into the grass for a generation. Mm. I think we have a real battle in that respect. But if you look at what's happened in recent elections, we have a situation where a government can be elected on a minority of a vote, like 43% in the Conservatives' cases, in 2019. And I mean, I don't think that was all the electorate, so that's even less. Yet they've got more than half the seats, and they have 100% of the power, and it's not right. And I think groups like Unlock Democracy, Make Votes Matter, and the Electoral Reform Society, really, it's really important to support them in their work. The Conservatives basically want to do sort of things to our constitution and our democracy that are actually essentially undemocratic. So it's not just about electoral reform; it's about the whole. In my view.
Thank you. Helen, do you want to add anything to that on AV, or has Tom covered it sufficiently?
I think Tom's covered it sufficiently. If I can just make the point that it's not just people on the left that are in fact, you know, and in the centre that are in favour of PR. We had a local That's Matter group, and half of the members were former UKIP people, because they are very keen on proportional representation. And I don't see a problem with electing. I think that's why the Conservatives are so dead against PR, because UKIP would probably get represented. But I don't see a problem with that, because if people, like with the Brexit Party, their MEPs were totally useless. And people saw how badly behaved they were in the European Parliament. So if they're not going to represent the people that have elected them, they won't be elected again.
Yep.
And I think it's important for minority parties like that to show how bad they are.
Right.
Also, if I can just make another point,
yes.
If people have know that their vote is going to count, then they won't have to vote for these extreme minority parties. They can vote for the Greens or the Lib Dems, knowing that they are going to be elected.
Thank you very much for that. I've got another. Tony, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, just to back up what Helen was said there. The other thing that we wouldn't have to worry about, similar to Helen's last point, is that in an election, you could actually vote for the party you wanted to. I mean, there was all that fuss between the various Remain groups, and I remember in Wales, they were deciding which seat would be allowed to have a Green candidate and not a Liberal, and which ones would have a Liberal, which ones would have a Plaid in, and there was a big fuss doing that. There would be no need for that under PR. You could vote for the person you wanted to, and know that if that vote, if that person was counted out of the election by coming too low down, your second choice would swing into play.
Thank you, Tony. Moving on, there have been several comments and observations in the chat column on a question by Harriet about compulsory voting. Do you want to ask that, Harriet, or shall I read it out as I've got it here? Is Harriet still there?
Yes, read it out. Do read it out, by all means.
Well, Harriet says, I'm absolutely convinced we need PR, no question, but I wonder whether people should also be obliged to vote, needing to provide a valid reason if they can't, with sanctions if they don't. What do others think? Who wants to go first on that? Yeah, Tony.
Well, I don't want to interrupt to go jump in front of anyone else who hasn't spoken yet, but if there's no one else, then
just looking for any blue hands. I haven't. Oh, George has got a hand up.
Yeah.
George, do you want to speak?
And I should be unmuted now. Can you unmute me?
Yes, you are unmuted now.
I think a lot depends on what happens in terms of the outcome of the Brexit debate and whether we have no deal or a crap deal. And once we know that, I think a lot of this will come into a far clearer perspective as to how we go forward.
Thank
so
you.
I think at the moment it's until we know what sort of deal is on the table, it's very difficult to say, at least in the short and medium term, what the future is.
Right, thank you. Tony, we bring you in there.
Yeah, just to go back to the question, should it be compulsory? I'm not sure whether it should be compulsory or not, but if it is compulsory, then it would be important to put on the bottom of the ballot paper a reopen nominations form, like there is in STV and this single transferable vote system, where the person who is forced to go along can actually positively vote for none of the candidates.
Thank you. Any other comments on this question of obligatory voting? George?
Well, and just on that point, I agree. But I think that we need to proceed slowly on this issue. I think it's catchy monkey time, and if we try to push this too soon, then it could be counterproductive.
Fair enough. That applies with, yeah. Some other questions, please? I don't see any other. Oh, Tony, you
Richard, can I I'd put it on the chat column, but for me, voting should be a social responsibility. So rather like we all decided over the last 20 years that smoking probably wasn't a good idea after all, I think we probably need to do something similar with voting so that it should be socially unacceptable for people not to vote. I don't think it ought to be made compulsory, because that involves all sorts of things like you can be taken to court and that can be used against you and that sort of thing. But the way to do it is to say, look, you really should vote, everybody. It's a good idea. And just for people to accept that, hopefully.
Thanks for that.
Helen and Jill have got their hands up.
Yes. Yeah. I'll take Harriet first.
Yes, I think, many European countries have, nobody would dream of not going to vote. So I'm not sure if it's obligatory or whether it's simply considered as a civic duty, which nobody in their right minds would go without doing. So, but how to go from our don't care system to that is very difficult. Might take generations of proper schooling. So I don't know whether it might be better not to oblige people to at first. But yeah.
Thank you. I'd like us to move back to proportional representation rather in a moment. But Jill had her hand up, and then Helen has got a blue hand up, and Tony had his pen up. So if we take Jill first, please. Did Jill want to speak?
Yeah, sorry, taking too long to unmute myself. Well, like Guy, I lived in Belgium and voting was compulsory. We only, as foreigners, had votes in European Parliament elections and in local elections, not in national elections. It wasn't a very onerous thing to do. I felt sort of perfectly happy to do it. Actually, nothing happens to you if you don't. You're supposed to be sort of called before the beak and pay a fine, but nobody remembers anybody ever having to do it. And if you're off on holiday, you just say, you send a copy of your airline ticket or whatever, and it's fine. But I tend to agree with others here that probably in British circumstances, we'd find it so odd that it wouldn't really work. But what I wanted to ask about, which is getting back to PR, if you like, because I wasn't in the country at the time, why on earth did we have why did the Lib Dems accept to have a referendum on AV? And what is so bad about AV? I mean, it's not fully proportional, but wouldn't it have been better than what we have?
Can I take Tony before Helen?
Yes, well, the answer to that is I've done one of these talks a couple of weeks ago to a Liberal group, to Liberals, and the opinion I got from them when this actual came up was that they felt it was the only thing which Cameron would give Clegg. That was the only thing which only as far as he would go. I think Clegg thought they felt that Clegg thought that it was get that and then move further towards PR in the future. He thought it'd be the first step. But actually, AV is not proportional representation at all. It is still a first past the post system. Okay.
Thanks for that. Helen, you wanted to say something more?
No, Richard, I've put my comments in the chat. I think Tom wants to answer this question.
All right.
Yeah,
Over to Tom then.
Thanks very much. Yeah, coming back, if we can come back to proportional representation, the issues that we have to deal with, the argument that's used by opponents in all, well, certainly Labour and Conservative Party, is that the consequence of it is that you get governments that can't achieve anything, and they quote Italy, and the people in the UK do seem to like the smack of strong government. And you get these responses when you talk to people about PR. And I think, unfortunately, the last 4 years where we had a very small majority actually adds to their argument, because it was complete chaos. I know it was all about Brexit, but that people again see the last period of 4 years as very poor government. And I just wondered how we're actually going to challenge those comments and what the arguments are to defeat them. I don't think fairness really rings a bell with the British electorate, to be honest. 40% of them don't care anyway. So how are we actually going to convince people that it's the right route to go down?
Who'd like to answer that? I mean, I've seen various comments in the chat column about
Hello?
the need to take people, and someone says the campaigns are we will get educate people. Who
We've got Judith King's screen.
who'd like
Well,
to
actually, you've
comment
got her husband. Can I just give the example of Scotland? We've had PR since the devolved assembly was set up, and it's been a fantastic success. If you want an example, it's still within the UK, just about, and it works fine. It's even managed to produce a majority government. But that's another story as to why the SNP was so popular. But there's a positive story to tell about a form of PR that has both local representation and then the balancing lists, like you have in Germany, where it's a success, like you have in New Zealand, where it's a success. So hopefully we can appeal to everybody. If you're pro-European, there's a German example. If you're an ardent imperialist, you can look to New Zealand. Wherever you go, we can come up with an example to sell to people for a successful system.
Richard, you're muted.
there was a and at the same time adding political education into schools on the wider use of different voting systems. And Tom Pratt said, could he answer that? But have you already?
Well, yeah, it was basically what Tony said before about the Conservatives. Basically, that was the only thing they were willing to give. So.
Who else?
Richard,
Tony.
Richard,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. The point about peer pressure that you just talked about was following on from voting should be treated in the same way that seatbelts were brought in, through peer pressure, and at the same time adding in some form of political education into schools and universities as that everybody has to attend, an unpartisan education on the wider use of different voting systems and different political systems. That was my point.
Thank you for clarifying that, Nigel.
Coalitions then, if
can I just go back to something that Tony Best said earlier? You were commenting on the number of, maybe the number of constituency Labour parties that support PR already. And I was trying to find something which I couldn't find yet. My system had crashed. Because I thought you mentioned 90 something or 95, and I thought it was more than 100 actually now. But there's a lot of constituency Labour parties that do support PR, and quite a few through the West Midlands, I believe. But what should we be doing? I mean, I suppose it's a question of becoming a member of the Labour, if you're a member of the Labour Party, encouraging your local party to there is a motion, isn't there, which can be adopted.
Yes, yes, there is. I haven't got any details of that, but certainly there is a.
I'm trying to find the link.
Those of you who are in the Labour Party, then bring it up at your constituency meetings and promote it and get them to come on board and see the sense for the Labour Party to come on board, that they will benefit from it. One of the other questions which came up is does it cause weak government? Or the answer from Scotland was quite right there. The gentleman was talking about Scotland. It shows just how important how it works. And someone else mentioned on this about the constituency link. There are many forms of PR which keep the constituency link. In Wales and in Scotland, they can still keep the constituency link. And one of the arguments in favour of PR is if Scotland can have it, and Wales can have it, and Northern Ireland can have it, then why not the English?
Good, thank you. I've just found the link to Labour for a New Democracy, which I've put in the chat. It came up at a Make Votes Matter meeting this last Monday, I think. So I put it in my favourites and it's there. Labour for a New Democracy. And I think on that you may find the motion and the number of CLPs that have actually signed up to it. And Tony's asked, are there any Labour MPs signed up to PR?
Yes, there are. Yes, yes.
Right. Do we know how many?
Is it a good number at the moment? How many are there?
I'm not sure how many there are, but certainly Stephen Kinnock in South Wales is very, very much for it, and he addressed Make Votes Matter in London at one of our action days, and there are others. My own MP is ambivalent, but I'm going to have another meeting with him sometime in the new year, and I'm going to attack him again with it. He ought to know better because he's a ex-politics lecturer, and he is in fact on the Labour front bench. He is the Shadow Home Secretary, so it's worth trying to put a bit of pressure on him. So he shall get a long note in his Christmas card.
Yes. Now, Tom Pratt's just commented that the Electoral Reform Society is in favour of the single transferable vote. What is the advantage of that, do you think, Tom?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Personally, I'm in favour of what's used in Germany, the additional member system, where you have a first past the post element and you have a proportional element to the system. So you have your constituencies, yeah, and then you have like top up votes. I think the single transferable vote, I suppose it's very similar to AV in the sense that you can vote for more than one candidate. So I suppose that's its advantage. But having stood for election where you've got 50 people or something like that competing for council seats, STP can be broken. But we'll see.
The system of proportional representation used for electing members of the European Parliament in this country was a system called D'Hondt, but that depends on a list, doesn't it? You don't need a list for STB, do you?
I don't know.
You don't have a list with STV because you're identifying which people you want to put your number against in sequence 1 to however many there are.
Yeah, the interesting sort of point was that for the UK was the only country in the EU holding elections using the D'Hondt method, like this list system. And that's partly because the ruling powers wanted to discredit PR.
Right.
Hi, Richard.
Yes, Nat.
Hi, yeah. I can yeah, just to come back on a few of those things. About the voting compulsory. I just think if we engage people in politics, we're trying to engage people in politics. There's a disengagement. If we kind of make it compulsory, then maybe that would be a turn off. And what we want to see is we want more informed voting, more voting for policies, and voting at 16 as well. I think would be good, and the Greens think would be good. And then what Tom was saying about fairness, and yeah, I think the British people are a bit in love with autocracy in a way. I think there is a bit of fear of democracy. And I do think that's unfounded. And I think there's a lot of people that are more invested in the status quo than actually anything changing. And I think what we'd see if we had those 17 Green MPs or whatever we're supposed to have, I think change is kind of what we really would see. And then on the Labour Party, Caroline Lucas did. When I went to one of these alliance meetings, Caroline said that Jeremy Corbyn, for example, he's not against PR, but he wasn't gonna fight that battle, which would be a bit of a hard one, until it became a real doorstep issue. And it's just making this issue a doorstep issue is so hard. You've got to talk about how it affects people's lives for real. And I think whoever said about positive stories from STV in the Republic of Ireland and Scotland, and the additional member system in Germany, which actually, interestingly, like Tom and like others here, I do actually really like the sound of the additional member system from Germany. I think it's telling positive stories.
Thank you. Tony Best, can I come back to you with a question? Because I mentioned at the beginning, and it's been mentioned subsequently, that the Senedd has given local councils in Wales the option to use STV rather than first past the post for local council elections. Do you have a sense how many of them are likely to take that up? Will it be the whole lot?
I would think it's more likely to be none of them. But I can't see many going for it. That's why we were a bit disappointed that they didn't make it compulsory for them to move to STV. I think many of the councillors in South Wales will not like it, certainly in South Wales, because there's a lot of the councils are very heavily favoured Labour strongholds, and I can't see any of the ones in most of South Wales ever voting against it. I would imagine perhaps some of the more forward-thinking ones in Mid or North Wales may do so. But I think it's going to be a hard struggle. I think the way forward with that is it's going to need a lot of work from Make Votes Matter and organisations like us to persuade people in Wales. And actually, I don't think Make Votes Matter is as strong in Wales as it is in England. Perhaps partly because we've already got a bit of proportional representation already.
Well, and of course, I think I saw that, is it called ERS Cymru was very much in favour of it. And that's partly surprising because Plaid Cymru would be likely to do better out of it, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah, but Plaid Cymru would do better out of it. And I think that worries Labour a bit.
Yeah.
Richard, Dave Underwood has his hand up.
Oh, thank you very much, Dave. Let's go to you.
Thanks. It's not really a question as such. It's just more of a maybe more of an observation. But I'm quite new to sort of the idea of PR, and I think a problem we may have with Nat saying, you know, that Corbyn was going to go for it because it wasn't a doorstep issue. I kind of see why. In a way, because for me, listening, even though PR sounds fair, it also sounds like a little bit confusing in some way. You know, with all these different systems, and you know, saying Germany has one, and you got the D'Hondt, and then you know, all these various systems, how it can work. And then I think as bad as first past the post, as unfair as it is really simplistic, isn't it? It's, you know, it's easy for people to understand. I think, you know, if you're going to campaign this and explain to somebody how PR works, there's no one simple way of explaining to somebody, is there? Because there are different systems, and even then within themselves, they sound a bit complicated. Maybe it's just me not being very intelligent and understanding everything, but it's just you know, just more an observation, really.
It's a very fair point, Dave, and you know, I think it's a struggle for most of us. But Tony wanted to comment on that.
Yes, it's a good question, Dave. But I think there are loads of different forms of proportional representation. But whichever one of those proportional representation systems you choose, it's better than first past the post. It is fairer and it gives a fairer result. And first past the post is simple, but that doesn't mean to say it's the best. We have this idea in Britain that, oh, this is our system and Britain has given democracy to the world and all that nonsense. Well, yeah, and the world has done something with it to make it better. And we're not asking, I would imagine that you would, if you went for PR, then there'd be some council or committee would get together and come out with a form to use. And once you've got a form to use, the system isn't for the ordinary man in the street is no more difficult than our own system. At the moment we go in, we put an X against one. But is it any more difficult to go into the polling booth and put 1, 2, 3, 4? Is it more difficult for the Welsh to put an X in one and then put, you know, a different vote in another, a second vote for the list? No, it's not. I mean, basically, it is not that difficult once you choose it, and it is very popular in countries once it's chosen.
Nigel had his hand up, but could I just add a comment there? Because we talked earlier about, or Tony talked about, the number of people who feel effectively disenfranchised because their vote doesn't count for anything. And a lot of those people who are effectively disenfranchised have been engaging in tactical voting where it's actually quite hard to work out what the result is going to be there too. And so just making the point that any system is going to be fairer than first past the post is probably the way to get the message across. Tony, Nigel, over to you.
Oddly enough, both you and Tony have just made the points I was going to make.
All right.
If everybody else is fine with it and can use it, I don't see why the British or the English in this case, this should be any different. They should be able to get it under their heads. And also about the disenfranchised, I think that's very true. It allows people to actually have a say that has a meaning rather than a nothing. Anyway, thank you for making those points for me.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nigel. Dave, any reactions to that?
Yeah, it wasn't so much the using of the system. I think fundamentally voting it's just going to go and put a tick in a box, and fundamentally that's what it boils down to. It's more the convincing people and explain it to it. You know, I think that's the point I was trying to drive at. You know, if you are going to make it a doorstep issue or try and convince people the system's fairer, then they say what system, and you roll out with something that, you know, you have 4 votes and this and that. You know, are people going to engage with that? Maybe they will. You know, I'm just saying, just from someone that's quite new to this, listening to it, it can be quite confusing. But yeah, I totally I get the point that it is fair. Undoubtedly, it's fairer. I mean, you know, I'm convinced on it, and I'm confused by it, and I'm still convinced on it. So maybe it doesn't matter if people are a little bit confused by it. Maybe that's irrelevant. I don't know.
Well, New Zealanders changed from it. New Zealanders made the change in 1996, I think, and they made the change after twice in a row the government which was put in power was not the government which had the most votes in the election. And they say, and when the party which lost out on both of those eventually did get in power, they said, right, we're going to do something about it. They had 2 referendums then to change, which were passed, and they had another referendum confirming it a few years ago. So the change can be done, and the New Zealand public are very, very happy with their system now. And I can't imagine New Zealand being any less conservative than the British.
Thank you for that. Can I go to George, who had his hand up a moment ago, and then Jill?
Richard, I think there are 2 key issues that are involved here. One is how the reality of Brexit actually turns out to be, and in a perverse way, the worse that it is, the better it will be in terms of a change to the electoral reform system. And secondly, whether Keir Starmer is successful in pushing through support in the Labour Party for it.
Right, good points. And Jill, you had a hand up.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, I very much agree with what George has just said. And on the business of complexity, well, you all managed to vote in European elections. I haven't voted in a European election ever, because I don't think we had direct elections when I was living in this country. I mean, nobody, as far as I know, nobody said this ballot paper is too complicated for me to work with. So we've all managed to do it. I would caution against great enthusiasm for the German system. And I think that the system we were using for the European Parliament, and which is the system the Irish use for their national elections, is a better system, because you have big constituencies, but everybody is elected within a constituency. The problem with making up numbers from party lists, which is also used, well, in Belgium, it matters where you are on the list, is that it gives all the power to the party leader. All prospective MPs on the list have to suck up to the leader and not really care about whether anybody in the country likes them or not, because it matters completely as to whether you're 5th or 25th. So yeah, that was my point. Thank you.
Tony's got his hand up again.
Yes, and there are systems which negate that problem. The system used in the capital territories in Australia and in Tasmania, they have a system where the list is there and you pick from the list. And the report which ERS came out, published on that, said the person who wrote it said he was amazed to see that people who were actually sitting in the territories parliament at the time was suddenly found that they were being beaten by people lower down the list, because you could actually vote for which ones on the list you wanted in order. So there are systems of PR which have a list, but which negate that problem.
Thank you, Tony. We've been going for over an hour now, and I'd like to wrap it up soon, but George has got his hand up again, so
well, I'm sorry, Richard, but just I think it's really important that we get our priorities right here. And whilst I am in favour of changing the electoral system, I think there's a process that we have to go through. And the first thing is we have to wait and see how disastrous this Brexit will be, because that will create an environment where people are far more likely to be receptive to changes in the voting system. And then once we've created that environment where people are prepared to listen, because at the moment they're not, as was just said, in terms of people are confused about all of this. Once we've got an environment where people are prepared to listen, to the flaws that there are in the current electoral system, then we've got an opportunity to explain all these myriad of different options that there are available. But we need to take it one step at a time. And if we try to move too quickly, we will simply shoot ourselves in the foot.
Thank you, George. That's a very fair point, and I don't think anyone's trying to rush at this, but where we are wanting to sort of think about the issues, get informed about the issues, so that at least we have got a clue as to where we might be trying to go on this. I saw someone made the point that, well, Nigel's got his hand up again, but Nigel made a comment in the chat, I think, that if we're having trouble here, then it rather makes Dave's point. Nigel, is that what you wanted to say? You're muted.
That's my point as well, Richard.
Yes.
No, that was, I think that was someone else. But I echo that point. I think the point about, well, there's 2 points I wanted to make. The first one was education and engagement and transparency are going to build change. Because if we just keep going around and telling people what they should think, they're not going to follow us. They need to be convinced about what is the best way forward. And one way of doing that is to see, I agree with George, is to go through that process of seeing how Brexit works and how the system that got us there has caused it in a way. So using those types of arguments and those types of discussions is more likely than to change people around. And there was another point, but it's gone. I'll stand down and give Helen her voice.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Now, was there someone else wanting to make another point, or can I wrap it up? We've been going for an hour and a quarter, and I want to...
Helen is put her hand
up.
Helen.
Helen.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that we need the first past the post system to work for a Labour Party or a coalition Labour Lib Dem Party to get into power before we can change the voting system anyway. We have to use the present system to get a party into power that will change the system, and I don't see that happening.
Thank you, Helen. Tom Pratt wanted to jump in again.
Thanks. So one of the measures that the Labour Party I know has called for is and would be very useful in this kind of instance is a convention on the Constitution, or you know, a citizens' assembly, and it would go into these issues in great detail. So the idea would be you'd pick, I suppose you'd pick ordinary people, you'd pick from random people who, you know, like jury service, except to be a lot longer, but no murder. But the idea was that this group would be given testimony and expert advice from people that know their stuff on all sorts of issues. And then after deliberation, they'd come up with some recommendations. And I mean, a really good model for this is what happened regarding the Irish referendum on abortion. So they got people, you know, that I think they had an assembly on it, and that came out with some recommendations which were then voted on. And I think in this kind of instance, obviously has been pointed out, you know, we all have different views about our favorite type of PR, but I think, you know, if we're in the position to have a constitutional convention to look at the whole root and branch sort of our democracy, then we might get to a system which is actually fairer than, you know, is fair for everybody. I think the main problem in British democracy is that it's too adversarial. It's too focused on one against the other. And I mean, you can actually see that in the makeup of the House of Commons. It's you know, it's adversarial. You know, it's one side against another. It's not like the European Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, or the Welsh Parliament. You know, where it's all in a circle. And if you
consensual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I suppose we have to overcome that really. I'm not quite sure how. I suppose education and engagement. I think I would also, one more point, and then I'll let you wrap up. But I think we need to be careful when we say that, you know, we hope that Brexit will be a sort of win, you know, bring about the winds of change, because you've got to think that the likes of Nigel Farage will be exploiting that to drag the country even further to the right.
Thanks, Tom. Tony, did you want to say a final word?
All I'd like to say is thank you very much for inviting me and listening. It's great to speak to you all, and you're obviously so very passionate in what you believe in, and I wish you all the best in that. And I just ask you, please, just make sure you send that Christmas card to your MP, please.
Thank you, Tony. And Nat, did you want to say anything finally?
No, it's just been a really great experience for me, just really stimulating and helpful, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Nigel, you waved a hand. Does that mean you remembered your second point?
No, I was trying to do that. I was agreeing with what Tom was saying, Tom Pratt was saying.
I've been in several online auctions recently, and I'm thinking I ought to go and grab my grandfather's gavel, because at the end of it, and the auctioneer is going, any more bids? Any more bids here, there? Fair warning. So a very, very big thank you to Tony and Nat for talking about Make Votes Matter broadly and here in Herefordshire, and to Tom Pratt for introducing Unlock Democracy to us and for all you said about that. It's been a fascinating evening. I will send George a link to the recording which Guy will put on our website, so you can all watch this again and be stimulated to further thoughts and actions. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good, everyone.